Welcome back to Nomad Boatbuilding. I'm Mark Rutan, and today on building the Catalina Wherry, we're going to finish beveling off our bottom and stems in preparation for installing our garboard planks. I've got all my stringers on here. We've fastened all of them to the stem and transom with polymer nails, and I don't know if this trick is going to work out for me, to be perfectly honest, but I'm going to give it a shot. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that is because when you buck these off short, it affects the spring of the plank over here. And we've seen that before when we've played around with fairing battens, that every little bit adds to the shape of the whole thing. And so by cutting this off here, all of a sudden all of these sort of spring a little bit. Now what I was thinking is if I wanted to make this a permanent fixture, if I were doing, say, this boat repeatedly, what I'd do is I would make up a false stem that sits right underneath the real one that all of these are fastened to. And then it would just be very easy to keep those in place. You could just pop this whole backbone right off and put it back in place. And we would do the same thing at the transom. We'd put a false transom in there. So right now I'm just going to start finishing off the beveling of this bottom board. Now our wherry shares some common heritage with East Coast dories, in which tradition dictates you start the construction by building a flat bottom panel, which dory builders refer to as the skillet. Now of course we need to have a nice flat line between this batten and the bottom itself, and we're pretty good already, but we need to come closer to our lines. Now what I found on the other side is I'm not hitting my line on the very bottom for some reason, and I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe there was sort of a disconnect between lofting process, making the patterns, making the bottom. It doesn't really matter. The point is I need to make sure that these jive. Whether or not the boat matches the design exactly is really of very little importance to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bevel all this off until I'm touching just the inside corner of my bottom down here. I don't want to leave a bunch of thick material down here, and I'm not going to worry about hitting that line. I know I'm going to stop a little bit short. It's not really a big deal. Up near the bow and stern it seems to be right on the money, and the midships we seem to be falling a little bit short of it. So the trick here is I'm using a plane with a stick attached to the side, and the stick is flush with the bottom of the plane, and what that's doing is that's carrying this bevel over from this rib band to the bottom. So no matter what I do, I cannot bevel this any other way than what is perfect for the spanning the distance between this rib band and the bottom, unless of course I raise this guy up. But so long as I keep this planted on a rib band and keep the plane relatively square to this rib band, it's all going to work out just fine. I'm just going to work my way along like this. It doesn't matter whether or not I start from the center and work towards the ends, or work from one end to the other end, or from the ends towards the middle. It doesn't make a bit of difference. The one thing you do need to be careful about is up here, when we get into this area, again, this is where all the twist happens, and this is where things can get extremely difficult to fit properly. So you always got to use like a little grain of salt as to whether or not you've got your shape right, and it's not until you apply a plank or a temporary plank or something to represent your plank that you can really get a feel for whether or not you've got this shape right. I'll throw a little wax on the bottom of the plane every now and then just to help it slide smoothly, and by all means you can throw some wax onto your stick too. And one thing I have found is you need to have a slightly more aggressive cut with your plane when you're doing this, and that's partially because you're not always getting the proper contact right at the blade. Sometimes the sole of the plane is interfering with how it interacts with the part you're trying to plane. And because we need to try and keep this line parallel, you don't have that ability to sort of skew this very much. course, because we're planing plywood end grain, it's going to be fairly hard on your plane blades, so there's going to be a fair bit of sharpening along the way. Now, something I've noticed amongst people who are new to lap straight construction is that they tend to succumb to two different pitfalls. They'll stay in one spot for too long and dig themselves a hole. That is, they create sort of a flat spot that the plane iron can no longer touch the bottom of. The answer is to simply work on both sides of that hole, reduce the humps that are preventing the plane from reaching its destination. But more often than not, they will deal with it by advancing the blade deeper and deeper and creating a coarser and coarser cut that makes it harder to control their work as they move forward. The other pitfall is that they will not sharpen their plane enough, and they'll find themselves with a duller and duller plane, and to compensate for that, they'll advance the blade further and further and further until either the throat of the plane just chokes up with coarse shavings, or they're just taking such a coarse shaving that they can't get the plane to bite properly. Regardless of what happens, the net result is that they have a hard time planing off that bevel accurately. The answer is you stop, you go and sharpen your plane, and then you adjust it properly and get back to work. And if it starts getting dull, you stop, you go sharpen your plane, you adjust it properly, and then you go get back to work. I'm just checking my edge here, trying to stop when I'm within somewhere coming down towards the feather edge. I also found as I got towards the ends here that my block plane was having trouble getting into this very slight hollow that's here. In fact, it doesn't even look like a hollow, it looks convex, but it has to do with the twist. There is sort of a hollow there, it's just hard to sort of distinguish. So the way I do it is I switch to a spoke shave. Now this spoke shave happens to have handles that come just about flush with the sole of the spoke shave, so I can use it just the way I was using the stick on the block plane, just running that handle down that rib band. And as I move forward, I'm careful to sort of check my work and make sure I'm trying to match what I did on the other side in terms of how far I bring this in. Now, you can also do a lot of this just using a sanding stick. So here I've got one with 80 grit on one side and I think 30 grit on the other side. And you can use it the same way you do the block plane, or the spoke shave. In fact, before gluing, it's not a terrible idea to do exactly that, just so that you get a nice rough abraded surface for the glue to bond onto instead of a smoother planed surface. Okay, I've been fairing out my bottom here, basically my chine bevel. And as you approach the stem, and of course the transom as well, or stern post, we need to make sure these things fit. And it's easy to figure that out along the way, but when you get up here where things start to twist, it becomes very difficult to judge that very easily. And so the best way to do it is to take a piece of material that approaches your plank thickness. And this is a little on the light side. This is 3/16 or 4 millimeter, and my finished plank is going to be 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter. But this happened to be hanging around, it was convenient, so I'm making use of that. It's close enough to do the job. And I'm just clamping it in place and having a good look at, does this wrap around my stem nicely? Do I need to shave off a little here or there with just some light pressure pushing down to make sure that it's fitting nice? And for the most part, it looks really good. There's just one little spot right in here where it's sitting just ever so slightly proud. I mean, I can get it to touch if I push, but I think I'll just take a little shave, probably back here and behind a little bit more, just to get it to tuck down nicely. And of course, you want to check up underneath as well and make sure that it's fitting against the back of your bevel as well. This is probably the most difficult area of the whole boat to deal with it because there's so much twist in here. There's always a risk of overdoing it and trying to find that fine line between leaving too much material in this area and taking off too much material in this area is a matter of being very patient and having something to work with to fit it. So if I take this plank here and I'll swing this down into position, what I'm looking for is being able to hold it down here in the area that it would be fastened and be able to sort of put a little bit of pressure in up here where it'll be fastened, because there's a bit of a hollow in here that we're teasing into it, and trying to find that point at which this lays nice and flat across everything without causing a big flare right here. Now this is the danger, is if you go overboard here, if you take off too much, you could end up having this thing flare out right here. If you don't take off enough, it could be a similar problem, especially if you've left too much down below and taken off too much up high. You wrestle it into shape, and then next thing you know, you've got this bulge that doesn't want to go away. So I'm just right now trying to find that sweet spot between it laying down nicely and not having a big flare right here. I can feel there's just if I look right in here, I pull this plank down, put a little pressure in my two spots, I can feel that there's right in this little spot right here is the one place that it's still holding up a bit hard. So I take a few strokes off. Not too much, because you could be chasing your tail if you overdo it and you got to try and fix it. That's feeling a bit better already. And you could use the sanding block for this too. Check again. That's feeling a bit better already. I feel like I've got a little bit more meat down here that still needs to come off too. That's feeling better already, just that little bit I took off. My gap is already feeling a little more even along here. And it's not that we want a gap, but there's always a slight shadow line. But it's telling me that I'm making contact down below and not so much right at the edge. So that's useful information. A couple more strokes. And I can flip back and forth between my sanding block and my plane, and that will help tell me where I'm working at it. Or you could throw some chalk on there or pencil lines. It's more by feel than anything else, I think. I mean, I'm certainly using my eyes and I'm observing. And my battens all here spring in a little bit inboard behind the edge of the stem, so I have to be careful I don't judge by those too much. It's like right back here at the station is what I'm concerned about. And that's, if I put my thumb here, top there, I'm getting good contact, so that's a good sign. I'm not seeing a big bulging flare right there. So I think we're pretty much there. I'll just give this a little scrub with a sanding block again, just to make sure it's ready for bonding. All right, I like that. Like that. Now in theory we should be working to lines that are drawn on the face of our stem, which is our what we call our rabbit line. Now this is the one area where trying to get this one fitted, you might have to fudge it over that line a little bit, because while the rabbit line is great, in theory it's exactly where you want to be. In practice, sometimes because of that twist, you have to push it a little bit, just to make it sit nicely. And that's partially because when you're drawing on, in 2 dimensions, you can't you can't really accommodate what that planking wants to do entirely, because of course you don't have a real plank there. Real planks have physical characteristics that can't be replicated entirely on a drawing. Okay, that feels really nice. There we go. So I'll move this plank out of the way, and or we'll move it to the other side and we'll start doing it. So I've already taken the rest of this side down to the theoretical finished point using both my plane with the stick attached to the side and using a sanding stick. And this is the point at which I make that switch over to using the plank to judge what I'm doing. I'm not being a complete slave to my lines at this point. Do keep them in mind, because if you start shooting past those a whole bunch, then you could find yourself in trouble. But it could be that you weren't 100%, so you're trying to find that sweet spot.
At first glance when dialing in the stern post, it didn't seem like I was going to hit my marks.
So right back here, there is a layout line for my lofting that runs right there. And up until I got in there with the plank, this felt like it was stopping short by, 3/8 to half an inch actually even. And that's just based on kind of eyeballing where these stringers are going and whether or not they're going to hit that point.
It was only by applying a temporary plank and carefully working down until the fit was right that I could be fully confident about my marks.
All right, the last thing I'm doing is I'm just going over this. I'm doing one last check with my plane and making sure that I got my attitude right. Even though I've been going at this with the stick on the plane and the sanding board across there, it's still not 100%. The angle is still out by a bit. I don't know why exactly, but the simple solution is you just got to take your time to go over it and clean it up. And bear in mind, you do need to keep sharpening your tools. This plywood is really abrasive. I've probably sharpened this plane about half a dozen times as I've worked this side down. And the moment you're pushing it and you're getting nothing but fine dust instead of a shaving off of there, it's a good sign that you've worn out that keen edge. Of course, I'm looking for the way the light plays off the bottom of the plane here. Looking for a light between the plane, sole, and the surface that I'm planing down. Now, while I've got this in place, this is telling me some other information too, and that is how wide my garboard planking needs to be. I've already done a rough spiling of this, just a quick and dirty one to get a general shape in mind. I wanted to see exactly how much shape is in this plank throughout its length. I thought about installing it as a one-piece plank, or rather a pre-scarfed plank. But when I laid it out, I found that it has quite a bit of shape and would be fairly wasteful to use. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But what this is telling me here right now is if I wanted to just cut two individual planks to fit this space, how wide would I need to make them rough cut in order to just fit over the areas that they need to cover. And it looks like I can get away with something that's just about 7 inches wide. That's going to require a scarf in the middle. Now, that's one of the reasons I wanted to use a battented mold, was so that I could hang individual portions of planks, scarf them on the mold. And it's something I can do with this fairly easily. I don't have to do it on the bench. I can do it right in place. The battens help me do that. Over here you can see the very rough spiling I made. Basically, these little tabs just show me where the edge of my garboard is, where it meets the keel plank. And the back side of this just overlaps my stringers by a little bit. The tail ends of these don't matter, but you can see how there's quite a bit of material here that it needs to take up in order to just get a single plank out of that stock. In fact, I would get 2 planks out of this whole half sheet of plywood right here, and that's it. So that's fairly wasteful, I think. So I lay this on here right here. At best, we take that, lay that off on the other side. I'm going to have a pretty skinny little piece of material coming out of the middle that's going to flare out towards the ends. Not very good use of the material. So I can probably use this pre-scarfed sheet of plywood somewhere around the midships area, and maybe we'll look at doing a spiling for it there, or we'll figure out some way to use it. But clearly using it for the garboards right now would be a fairly wasteful activity. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to rough cut some stock from my planking pile just to fit here in place, and we'll trim it down to size and get it ready for installation. Okay folks, we'll pick this up where we left off in the next video when we fit and fasten the garboards. I want to thank everybody on Patreon who helps support these videos. If you can help me out on Patreon, I really appreciate that. You can find links in the corner or down in the description. You can also subscribe, and don't forget to click that bell to get notifications. And please join me again next time on building the Catalina Wherry. Now get out into the workshop, go get your hands dirty, and I'll see you later folks.